Hello and good morning to all of you, distinguished delegates, presenters, experts from SAARC region. So this is the second day of our online training on LNG business strategies. We had an excellent set of presentations yesterday from Dr. Balyan and Mr. Swami. So today on our agenda we have two presentations. One will be delivered by Mr. Swami, which will be on the developing LNG liquefaction capacities, key challenges. And the other presentation after the break would be by Mr. Rajiv Mathur, and the topic of that presentation would be global LNG trade. So first, I would like to just inform the participant that, as mentioned yesterday, that this is an interactive kind of a training workshop. So you are very welcome to pose any question at any time of the presentation. We would ask our experts to give 1 or 2 minutes time after every 10 minutes for you to address your queries or your question answers. So you are welcome to post any questions to us in the text chat box, or if you want to speak, we can also give you a audio facility to ask the question yourself to the experts. And after the end of each presentation, we would again give 10 to 15 minutes time for addressing all the questions for the for that presentation. Another thing is that all the presentations which were delivered yesterday are available on our SEC's website, official website. The presentations which will be delivered today will also be uploaded on the SEC website. So you can also get access to those presentations later on. Secondly, the recordings of all these trainings, everyday trainings, will be uploaded on SEC websites after the conclusion of the complete training on Friday. So over to Mr. Swami Dayal Prasad. As I have already introduced him, I would just like to briefly introduce. Mr. Swami has a rich experience of 4 decades in energy sector, power generation and fuel sourcing. A graduate mechanical engineer from Agra University, he also possesses an executive postgraduate diploma in business management from Management Development Institute, Gurgaon. He has a deep learning of the coal and gas sourcing. He also oversaw the E&P activities for the oil and gas blocks against licenses secured in the domestic NELP rounds. So the detailed profile is already available on our website. The topic of his presentation is developing LNG liquefaction capacities, key challenges. Key challenges in development of liquefaction capacities, technological innovations, LNG shipping, existing, upcoming and future of LNG liquefaction and shipping. Over to Mr. Swami. Swami Saab, could you unmute yourself?
You are muted, Swami.
Yeah. So welcome all the participants to this day 2. We had 2 very invigorating sessions yesterday, very long, very demanding sessions, and it was nice to see the participants bubbling with enthuse and raising a lot of queries. So the session 1 yesterday, it laid the foundations for this program, talked about energy, its relevance to mankind, the emerging issues, the gap between the developed and the developing countries, mostly SAARC nations, the issues and the challenges to combat climate change, sustainability, development goals, the energy projections, and how natural gas can play a role as a bridge fuel or a destination fuel, and what can be its expected share. So all very well and in the best possible manner it was delivered by Dr. Balyan. And then we also saw what was the energy requirement and what is the potential of energy requirement in the SAARC member countries. What is the dependence on petroleum products and particularly on imports? To what extent the SAARC nations are dependent on petroleum imports? We saw that. And then we analyzed whether natural gas is a competitive fuel. Is it economical? And then if at all, then to what extent in different countries at the prices of different petroleum fuels which are available. So these were the 2 sessions yesterday. We also went through the demand and supply. It was a data heavy slides yesterday, but then you need data to really come to some some conclusions about what path you have to follow in your energy sourcing. Now, you all know that gas supply and distribution is a very capital intensive business. You have to develop the gas reserves, you have to lay long pipelines, distribution networks, all right up to the consumer's burner tip, very expensive and a tall order. Lot of so in case nations as consumers do decide to go in for further gas and further LNG sourcing, so you need to again install very expensive regasification or LNG receiving terminals. So again, there's a huge exposure to capital risk. And then the questions are asked whether the LNG and the LNG receiving terminals, whether it will be really worthwhile to invest in them, whether LNG is a dependable business in the long term, whether it will be affordable, whether it will be available at all points of time, whether it will have decent terms and conditions of supplies, it will be free from geopolitical biases. So we therefore need to understand about the upstream part of the LNG liquefaction and shipping. So this will help us in understanding the LNG trade, the LNG contracts, how they are. And so today's session will be on what are the challenges on LNG shipping. I'd just like to open my slide. Can you share me the slide opening?
Start your presentation.
Is my slide open? Is my slide available?
Yes, we can see your desktop.
Okay, if you can see my desktop, then I'll just open the slide. So once again, a warm welcome to session 3, key challenges in development of global LNG capacities. And this is the brief outline. We just go through a brief history of liquefaction and what are the liquefaction technologies, what are the issues and challenges in development of the LNG facilities, and then what is the status of the LNG capacities, operational, under construction, and who are the key nations which are involved with developing the capacities, and then about LNG shipping, what are the key characteristics which make it a very niche business and shipping of LNG to be so expensive. So this slide I'll omit, but for brevity, I had kept all the information which was covered yesterday about how gas is liquefied. And this is a brief history now. The liquefaction research, scientific researchers started, just a minute. They started in the 17th century. Boyle, Joule, Lord Kelvin, all scientists, they put in a lot of effort. By 1908, all the gases, including helium, were liquefied in laboratory conditions. Helium was liquefied at -269. Methane was liquefied in 1886. So by 1930, we had decent technologies for storage of methane in the United States. And this abundant availability of natural gas clubbed with the commercial production of LNG, this led to the first commercial liquefaction and storage plant in 1940, and this was by the East Ohio Gas Company at Cleveland, Ohio. So this was basically for storing LNG and regasifying it for the peak shipping demands in the winters. So by 1948, this storage facility had 4 large cryogenic vessels for storing LNG and meet the demand. But in 1944, the leakage of LNG from one of the tanks, it led to the spillage of LNG into stormwater drains, into sewers, and caused major explosions in the town, which claimed several lives, and the facility was then closed down. But the accident at Cleveland LNG facility was a blessing in disguise for the industry because it stepped up research in the in the low temperature alloys, in the insulation materials, and a whole review of the liquefaction technology and the practices for safe storage and handling of LNG. And this actually paved the foundations for what we have, successful and safe utilization, commercial utilization of LNG. A brief history of the ocean-going vessels. So in 1958, backed by funding from the British Gas Council, a used World War II cargo ship was converted as an LNG vessel in America, Alabama Dry Dock Yards. This was called the Methane Pioneer. Prior to this, in 1951, an attempt was made to convert a river barge into a LNG vessel, a small LNG barge, river-going barge, but that was not approved by the United States authorities. So this Methane Pioneer, this project was operated by a joint venture. It was formed between Conoco Union Stockyards, and this was later joined by Shell. And this also spells out the legacy in the field, why Conoco and Shell are so deeply entrenched into the LNG liquefaction value chain. In 1959, the first voyage took place. It was cross-Atlantic from America to England. And in the meanwhile, there was a very large discovery of natural gas reserves in Algeria. And this catalyzed the entire LNG industry because they wanted to bring this gas to the Europe mainland, Britain, France, and Spain. And everywhere the commercial manufacturing got underway. So in 1964, the world's first purpose-built LNG carrier, the sailing ship Methane Princess, along with a sister ship, Methane Progress, they were manufactured for the British Gas by Vickers for supplying LNG from Algeria to England. Meanwhile, technology development was taking place across Spain as well as France. Gaz de France, GDF, was also pursuing development of LNG shipping technology, and various prototypes were being requested from different manufacturers in different shipyards. And finally, in January 65, Jules Verne vessel began transporting LNG on the Algeria-France route. So this is the initial part of history of the LNG shipping, which began and finally took off in 1964-65. Throughout the decades of 60s and 70s, the United States, which had sizable gas reserves as well as pipeline infrastructure, it then restarted its LNG industry with a series of liquefaction and regasification plants. And the activity was mostly for meeting the winter's peak shaving demand, and was confined mostly on the East Coast and the Gulf Coast, Texas, Louisiana, and other states. And then in the 70s and 80s, many gas producing countries have started producing LNG. Brunei started in 73, Indonesia in 77, Malaysia in 83, Australia in 89, and then later on, Qatar joined it in 1997. But then another turning point came after the shale gas boom, when US turned a net exporter of gas. And many facilities in the US, which were basically for importing LNG, they were converted to LNG export terminals. And we will see in subsequent slides how US has emerged as a major LNG exporter. Now, there are two popular types of methodologies, technologies for the commercial liquefaction of natural gas. The first method uses the refrigerant to cool the natural gas in stages, and this is called as the cascade method. The second method is based on the Joule-Thomson effect, that is compressed gas gets cooled when expanded through an orifice, the kind of cycle which you have in your refrigerators and your air conditioners. Now, most of the liquefaction companies, design companies, they develop their own customized liquefaction processes. And the most popular ones today are the technologies made by Air Products. There are several of them, and total they have a share of about 67% in the global installations. Next come ConocoPhillips. They're optimized, and this is ConocoPhillips after the merger between Conoco and Phillips. Now it is ConocoPhillips. originally Conoco, and the optimized cascade process. This is the next most popular technology. And then there are other proprietary processes from Shell, Linde, and others. Now, the nature of the LNG liquefaction business is so complex. The technology is so complex and involves such high intensive metallurgy and process control elements that these liquefaction processes are all licensed out. They are all under IPR, and they're all owned by the companies which have developed these processes. The compressors are the heart of the liquefaction plant, and they were initially powered by steam turbines, but then they have given way to gas turbines because of efficiency and availability of gas. And then based on the techno-economic considerations, the liquefaction technologies can be customized for manufacturing or for configuration of a wide range of liquefaction capacity equipment. Each liquefaction capacity unit is called a train. So a liquefaction facility selects one or multiple trains of suitable capacity or sizes, depending upon many factors, and we will see what they are later on. So over the years, for optimizing costs and for achieving economies of scales, the train sizes have gone up. And the train sizes have gone up to 7.8. So you have at one end of the stream, you have an LNG plant with almost 9 or 10 trains of 0.68, and you also have LNG plants of trains, 1 or 2 trains of 7.8 MTPA. So it all depends upon how the EPC contract and how the designers they select the train configuration. So as per Rystad Energy, in the last decade, the most popular liquefaction technologies were provided by Air Products, followed by ConocoPhillips. And for the next 5 years, the trend continues. And these are followed by Linde and Shell. And this slide which you see, this is very important because this brings out that in 21 to 26, these are the kind of technologies which have been ordered. And the different types of technologies, these are air product technologies, ConocoPhillips, and so many of them. And what I want to bring out is you see the diversification of the orders. Orders are well diversified into different technologies. So this expresses how mature the technologies have become, how much of confidence the LNG developers have on these technologies, and all of them have matured. That means all of them have reached significant levels of cost reductions, of efficiency, and energy that is consumed in producing, minimizing and optimizing the energy that is required for producing LNG. So the key features in development of a facility, two very important features, if you ask me, they are the high capex and the high project delivery time. So as per a report of Oxford Institute of Energy Studies, and they have quoted an Ernst & Young report of 2014, which has data about 50 LNG plants, and it indicates that the capital outlay for an greenfield LNG project size works out to about 10 to 11 billion dollars. And this is what would be required for laying about 15 to 20 gigawatts of power capacity. This is the kind of and power capacity of whether it's coal, gas, or renewables. You can lay 15 to 20 gigawatts in this much of money is what is required just to make one LNG facility. And then the delivery time. So the delivery time is very high, 8 to 10 years in conceiving of the project to the delivery of the first cargo. So this is for the greenfield, and for the brownfield, it may take less. And of course, the most important part, another important feature I discussed was the technology part, the engineering and production part. So about the scale of investments, the gas supplies, the three important elements in LNG supply chain are gas supplies, the cost of the LNG plant, and the shipping. And some thumb rule and some benchmark studies of Oxford, they have indicated that The gas supplies, across the globe, the benchmarks are between $2 to $3.5. In fact, in some of the countries, it can be less than $2 also. Qatar could be less than 2. But then these are the benchmarks which they have established across the globe. The LNG plant, that is the most cost intensive and the complex element of the supply chain, as discussed in the earlier slides. So in terms of levelized costs of gas, this can translate from $2 to $4.5 per MMBTU. And the shipping costs, they depend upon the ordering of the capacity and the size of the fleet of LNG vessels. Because you see the average cost of the LNG vessel of about say 175 to 180 cubic meters, 1,000 cubic meters is about 180 to 190 million US dollar for propulsion systems, the modern propulsion systems like MEGI or the XDF. And of course, the long-term charter costs also depend upon the capex, upon the efficiency in the bunker fuels used. And at present, they are about $70,000 per. This is an average because this would vary depending upon the type of vessel and the type of bunker fuel used. So, and also it also depends upon the distance on the voyage. So this is an illustration of the scale of investments, and the illustration is of LNG Canada plant, LNG liquefaction plant, which is coming up in British Columbia. So this is from Oxford Institute of Energy Studies. This is a greenfield facility of 14 MTPA, and the project comprises of 3 important parts. First is the development of a gas reserves, which would supply the gas, and then a pipeline, a 670-kilometer pipeline that would be laid to Kitimat, where the LNG plant would be located, and then the liquefaction plant, which is initially of 14 MTPA and with a provision of future brownfield expansions. So the FID presentation, it talked about capex to the tune of 31.2 billion, and the data which came out was that the upstream development of the gas reserves alone requires 12.4 billion US dollars. The pipeline would require about $4.8 billion, and the liquefaction plant would require about $14 billion. So it was a very tall order. This is the kind of capex that is required. So to mobilize finances and then certainty of offtake, the developers roped in buyers or affiliates who are oil and gas portfolio players from different countries to participate in the equity. The lead partner was Royal Dutch Shell, and it holds about 40% equity, and the rest comes from Petronas, PetroChina, Mitsubishi, and Kogas. So based on the investments, they broke up the target price of delivery at terminal JKTC, the Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China, and this is how the cost comes. The gas supply cost comes to $2.5 per MMBTU, 2 for the upstream gas cost and 0.5 for the pipeline tariff, 50 cents for that. Liquefaction costs are about the rate of the plant is installed at the rate of $1,000 per ton per annum. So this comes to about $3.5 per MMBTU. And the LNG shipping from Kitimat to Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China would be about $1. The gross margin is about 1.5, and then this is the delivery at terminal price. So the FID was achieved in October 2018, and the project is halfway through, and the first cargo is targeted for delivery in 23 or 24. But you see the scale of investment, $31.2 billion for a 14 MTPA. That is this was a slide which was shown yesterday by Dr. Balyan. This is how the LNG prices have grown over the time. And now the developing of a facility, it requires some key ingredients. First is the primary requisite, that is the availability of gas. Then you have to identify the markets, long-term committed buyers. You have to finalize the technology, and you need a capable and a committed team of professionals, for carrying out the EPC for the entire life cycle of the project. The team should be committed, and then you need a committed financing, whether it's a balance sheet or whether it's a project finance. and you need a team to, implement the project, monitor it, and ensure the cash flows and all those things. So the primary requisites are the availability of surplus natural gas or reserves. And yesterday, Dr. Balyan did mention that the thumb rule is that you need about a reserve of about 1.5 TCF to 1 TCF to develop a capacity of 1 million tons per annum. So you must have some available surplus gas. Either you have shippers, as in the United States, who can supply you gas, you have the suppliers, or you should have reserves to develop. If you have the reserves to explore and develop, then you should have good E&P capabilities. So you need good pipeline capabilities or E&P, and you need pipeline connectivities. And for feasibility, you need land and you need a suitable port. So, and most important part about the LNG liquefaction is then again identifying markets. So normally LNG is targeted as a fuel substitute. So the supply of LNG should be at prices which should offer fiscal benefit to the consumers as also to the manufacturers. Now the end users and the portfolio players in the markets are normally targeted. Once the market is targeted, then the end users or the portfolio players which can be used for those markets, they are looked at. So portfolio players are LNG stakeholders who have offtake stakes in LNG supplies from different regions or from different liquefaction facilities, and they own their own storage, they have the shipping fleet, and they have some regasification terminals. So the new trend in identifying upfront customers for an upcoming LNG facility is affiliate marketing. Affiliate marketing model is become very popular now, wherein the affiliates, which include end users or the portfolio LNG companies, they invest in the exchange of a share in the offtake. EPC, or the technology part and the engineering, procurement and construction part, is the most important part, very technology intensive in development of the facility. So the key considerations for the technology should be safe, reliable, economical, or it should be very optimal. And then the whole gamut of considerations to be considered for selection of the technology and developing the technology and the design for the liquefaction plant. And then, of course, the EPC team also looks after the project implementation and the issues to ensure that the project's targets are met. So the project cycle, LNG liquefaction plants project cycle is in 3 stages. One is the pre-FID stage. Now, FID is financial investment decision, which is committed, and the pre-FID stage, the FID stage, and then the post-FID stage. This is what distinguishes, the project. It is a very common part of any project cycle, but why it is important for an LNG plant, we will see that. Now, the pre-FID, why is it important is because before the financial investment decision is made, a lot of commitment is required from the developers. And you have to carry out the feasibility studies. So gas supplies on long-term basis, pipeline connectivity, the adjoining ports, and identification of sites. So this is just the feasibility part. And all the local issues also you have to address, that you should not run into any problem as far as the legal issues are concerned, regulatory issues are concerned, access issues are concerned. So these all come under the feasibility studies. And then comes the front-end engineering and design stage. And this stage preliminarily addresses technical issues like capacity of the connecting pipelines, the liquefaction plant's capacity, and what would be the configuration, and what is the targeted efficiency, and what would be the draft and the berthing at the port, storage capacity also, and what would be the benchmark EPC cost for this type of project, and of course the benchmark cost for developing this kind of a specific kind of the port and the logistics, etc. So these all come under the pre-FEED studies. And then another most important vital part of the pre-FID stage is the marketing, where you actually firm up a buyer, which can be an end user or a portfolio player or a trader. And the key issues are you have take or pay along with the mitigations. You have price indexation clearly defined upfront. You provide them operational and commercial flexibilities and dispute resolution mechanism. So all this we will see in detail, but the point is that the marketing has to be tied up upfront. And then you carry out, after you've done that and you have a letter of intent or a heads of an agreement, you carry out the detailed engineering, you carry out the front end engineering and design. So you complete the technical specification, cost estimates, and the tender documents are prepared for all the packages, and you invite bids and complete all the pre-award discussions. And you also finalize preliminarily long-term charters, agreements, or preliminary finalizations of the orders. All the studies are already done, and all the all these activities are brought to a pre-order stage, including all long lead materials, etc. And after the feed is over, there has to be a negotiated sale and purchase agreement with the buyers. So this completes the stage of the pre-FID, and then you go in for your financial investment decision. So here you have your finalize the structure of the project finance model. A very thorough due diligence is again carried out just at the time of FID for all the contracts, sale purchase agreements, the raw gas supply agreements, the gas pipeline transportation agreements, EPC contracts. So you carry out a due diligence, and then based on anticipated cost, you work out the IRR. And then all these reports are reviewed by the decision-making bodies, and FID is accepted, or it is deferred for a later decision. Once an FID is achieved, then immediately you place out all orders for the main orders for the equipment, CPC, shipping, port infrastructure. All of those orders are ready, and they are immediately, once the FID is achieved, those orders are placed. So that is the final commitment. Now the key post FID activities are that you place the contracts and you ensure that the project management takes place, the cash flows are there, and all the issues related to health safety, to the HRD, manpower, and all operational issues are taken care of. And why post FID is also very important is because in a study by Pricewaterhouse on risks in LNG projects, 13 of the 20 large-sized LNG projects, they face cost and time overruns. And the key attributes, 2/3 were attributed to project execution issues, and 1/3, and this included the financing also, and 1/3 were due to management delays in decision making, or due to unforeseen environmental and government and local issues, interferences, etc. Delays in an LNG project can upset the IRR in the long run. This is I've just taken an illustration from this Pricewaterhouse study in Canada. So it takes about 5 years to complete the pre-FID stage.
Excuse me, Swami Saab, we have a question from one of the
I'll just close. I'll just give me a minute. Let me close the liquefaction, and then we will.
Okay.
I'll just take the question out of this slide. So this is the
Sure,
last
sir.
slide for the liquefaction, and then I'll take the questions.
Sure,
So
sure.
this study reveals that the manpower requirement will be very high. So this study reveals, first of all, the timelines. So about 5 years are required in the feasibility, pre-feed, and the feed, and then 5 years are required for the construction. And if you look at the peaking, the manpower requirement, you need about 200 people just to complete the feasibility, and about 400 to 500, a team of 400 to 500 skilled and experienced professionals to complete the pre-FEED stage. And then for front-end engineering, you need more than 500, a team of 500 skilled EPC and design engineers, to complete the FEED stage before you can actually sign this sale purchase agreement. So if you see, you already invested almost more than $1 billion just to reach the financial investment decisions. And that is why when I started this section of the presentation, my purpose was to bring out facts which bring out the real complexities in liquefaction. So FID of a liquefaction facility means that you have achieved very major milestones and now the construction will go on because everything has been tied up. It's all project implementation, and that's it. So in spite of the complexities in installing LNG liquefaction capacities, what is the near future and long-term outlook? And are we comfortable? Do we have the comfort of adequate liquefaction capacities coming up? We'll see later. First, we'll take a question, Mr. Hassan. I'll just take those questions which have come up.
So we have one of the question is from Dr. Nawaz Ahmed, who is the current director of SAARC Energy Center. So we will get Dr. online, who will ask question from you directly.
Right.
Sir, you have to unmute yourself. We cannot hear your voice. We can see your screen, but we can't hear you.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir. You may.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Swami. Very nice, introduction about FID and LNG liquefaction, basically development facilities. So far LNG market is not liquid like oil product. So it means upfront you need to lock your marketing, like how much volumes you can lock in before pre-FID. That is more important for LNG liquefaction development. So over the period of time, the market is getting more liquid towards, basically moving towards liquid, with the installation of lot of LNG liquefaction facilities around the globe. LNG market is growing. There is a lot of uptake of LNG driven by mainly energy transition fuel. So over the period of time, can you say about how much percentage of LNG before FID decision making needs to be locked for decision making, and historically what has been the trend and where we are right now? How much percentage of your plant capacity needs to be locked through marketing before pre-FID? Thank you.
Well, so ideally, historically, in the initial stage, the locking of capacity or the tie-up of the capacity would be approximately to the extent of 80 to 90% of the LNG facility, and there would be a 10% up or a 10% down, and this flexibility would also be offered depending upon how the facility comes up. Because when you are in that stage of pre-FID, you are not very sure what can be the complexities during project implementation. And in fact, because you want to be very sure, that is the reason why the liquefaction costs are so high. You'd want a very dependable EPC player to carry out the design and give you the cost estimates. But it is roughly about 80 to 90%. And even now, when you have the affiliate marketing models, you have the tie-ups. I gave the example of LNG Canada, which is a classic example, because LNG Canada, they were not able to close the FID, and finally they were able to bring in affiliates. So they have they have almost the 100% offtake is tied up. We don't have the intricacies of the agreements with these players. Otherwise, probably we can elaborate even more on what kind of tie-up, what kind of assurance have these participants from Japan, China, Malaysia, and KOGAS have provided to LNG Canada. But certainly a good sizable offtake is tied up in either in terms of equity or in terms of offtake.
Mr. Hassan, with your permission, can I further engage in discussion?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure. You can go ahead.
Okay. So, Mr. Swami, with development of LNG market globally, with demand driven basically from major economies, So what we can expect in future, how tough will be FID for liquefaction facilities without locking, or there is any opportunity without locking pre-FID volumes, marketing volumes? Can we, what future we are looking for?
I think so. The liquefaction facilities, the way the costs of liquefaction have come down, and the way the shipping industries have reacted, and the way the cost of shippings have reduced, thanks to the port, thanks to the shipbuilders in in South Korea, we do see that once the costs have come down, there is less pressure for financing of liquefaction capacity. Number one. Number two, the abundant availability also puts less pressure on the developer, abundant availability of gas. And third, the way portfolio players are increasing. That is also a very big sign of FIDs being reached earlier. I just want to make a case in the point that as on date, I was just going through some data. We have 68 shipping lines in the world, 68 of them who have either placed orders or who own shipping LNG shipping vessels. Similarly, the portfolio players have increased over the years. They have increased their footprints in different countries, and they are in a position to understand what the market is. So with that, the ease in FIDs has increased, and thanks to the new US LNG plants and the approach taken by them, the transparency expressed by them with the portfolio players. Why it has been possible is because of the transparency in sharing with the affiliate partners how they are going to liquefy, what would be the liquefaction costs, and particularly in Cheniere and so many places, so many projects, we have seen that the developer has shared a lot of data, and that has he has reposed a lot of confidence amongst the off takers, whether they were portfolio players or end users. That's
Can I
Thank you.
add a little more to what Swamiji has mentioned, that as the market is now going towards the liquid market in future, and so far we have seen that around 40% trade is spot and short term, but major quantity which is exported to Asia, which is around 2/3 of LNG, is consumed in this region, and where the market is not that liquid, because we are not having that kind of a hubs or exchanges as there in US and Europe. So till that happen, I think that investor and developer of LNG liquefaction facilities definitely would like commitment of 80%, 60%, 70%, because the huge investment, and they are mostly lenders driven. And where it is not like the project, we have only few projects which is equity driven, like something happened in Australia by Gorgon or other, but most of this lender driven. When the lender project is there, market is not that liquid that should be like we have in a situation of crude. So definitely the commitment for the volume is required before going into the development of a project. Thank you.
Just to add on,
Vivek.
sir, projects which are in expansion mode may require lesser amount of firm commitment over longer terms as opposed to a greenfield project. And as rightly put, while liquidity is increasing, but for greenfield projects, they may still want 70 or 80% volumes tied up. But for brownfield projects and expansion projects, incremental projects, they may still end up with maybe 40, 50% kind of long-term agreements. Also, long-term agreements are now coming down from 20 years to an average of around 10 years. So lenders are also looking at taking some amount of risk in terms of short-term agreements and liquid volumes being sold going forward towards the tail end of the project life cycle.
So can we say that in making the LNG market liquid, the most important role is from liquefaction facilities, LNG production side, not from the consumer side, because consumers are there and they want to make their demands, plan their demands based on future liquefaction facilities. So
I think all the stakeholders have to pitch in, to make the market liquid. It is
Yeah,
not just a
in nutshell,
liquefaction. Yeah.
I think we lost Nawasab. Nawasab, could you repeat the part of question again? Your comment, we couldn't hear you.
what
Nawasab, could you repeat the second part of your statement? We couldn't hear you properly. Okay, so I think we have lost some audio from.
we'll just continue with the
Yes.
very relevant questions. And actually, when you read more about trade and you read more about contracts, these things, these kind of figures get allayed. But it's a very relevant question which he put up. And the fact is that the world is moving towards more liquidity. But with liquidity in commodities also comes the risk of manipulations and things like that. It can be manipulated. The price can be manipulated. So those risks also come when you make the commodities very liquid, as we see in today's markets. So I think we move on to the presentation, and we'll take these questions as and when Mr. Zaman is there. So the question is, what is the near future and long-term outlook of liquefaction, and whether we have the comfort of adequate liquefaction capacities coming up? Well, let us look at the global LNG capacities. What are the operational capacities? What are the utilizations? What are the under construction capacities, or the capacities for which FIDs have been taken recently? What are the capacities in pre-FID? That is very interesting, because the demand comes and these capacities can be brought online. And then who are the key nations who are involved with developing the LNG capacities? What are the maturity levels they have reached? What kind of competencies they have reached? That's very important. These are the operational capacities: 452.9 million tons per annum as in February 21. Capacity added in 20 was 20 million tons per annum. Due to COVID-19, many LNG trains were deferred. Australia is now the global player with 87.6 MTPA, followed by Qatar, and USA has now come up and it has merged as a major player, number 3, but 69.1. And we will see about USA a little later. But what is interesting is that we have 452.9 MTPA as in February against a trade of just about 350 per annum. And here is what you see is the utilization. The utilization, although it was impacted in 2020 by COVID-19, but still it was around 74.6%, with Papua New Guinea, Qatar, and Russia. They have recorded 100% or more. Now the interesting part of this slide and this the numbers or the bars which are coming up and the utilization rates which are coming up is that even if you unlock 10% utilization, even if the utilization goes to 85.6, you release a quantity of about 45 million tons per annum, which probably is just about what was imported by India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh together in 2019 and 2020. So just an increase of 10% is that much of volume. So then the liquefaction capacity is under construction. So as per IGU, 139.1 MTPA are under construction, including the FIDs. And in 19, a record FID of nearly 70.6 was achieved. This is how we had the FIDs in 2019. Yeah, COVID-19 did impact the FIDs, which was slated for 20. And there was only one project which achieved. Yesterday, Dr. Balyan has mentioned about that, the Baja California, Mexico plant. In February 21, Qatar achieved FID for 4 trains, about 32 MTPA, and the FID capacities under construction and approved as in February are about 139, as I mentioned above. And this is 30% of the existing operational capacity. So 30% of the operational capacity is going to come up in the next few years, maybe 3-4 years, progressively they will come. So about 66 MTPA out of this 139 is being developed only by the USA. And yeah, USA is likely to emerge as one of the largest exporters of LNG by 24-25. These are the FERC approved capacities which were under construction in the USA as on 21st April as per the FERC website. This is a tender amounting to 8.37 BCFT, and this is about 66 MTPA when converted into million tons of. Now, in the pre-FID stage, as per the IGU's 2021 World LNG report, nearly 892 MTPA facilities they have achieved the feasibility rate, but they are still in the pre-FID stage. And United States again leads with 351.6 MTPA capacity. North America, in fact, Canada also with 227. But they are all in the pre-FID stage, and it will take quite some time for these capacities, proper demand, and so many other things. Now, what are the countries which are active in LNG liquefaction capacity development? In USA, which has about 352 MTPA of pre-FID projects, 137 MTPA had obtained FERC approval in May 21, actually, that is May 21, April 21. So these are the facilities in USA which have been approved by FERC. They are not under construction because they need FIDs. So there is a significant capacity which has the regulatory approval. Now, Qatar has discovered in 2019 in North Field a reserve of about 17.60 discovery, and then it plans to further add to the 4 trains that it announced in February, and it wants to develop its capacity from 110 to 120. So 110 would be the capacity in next 4 or 5 years, and then it wants to add 2 more trains probably from this discovery in the North Field. That is what we have read from the reports. And Russia has been there for last 20 years. It has been able to commercialize its Arctic gas assets, and several trains, several projects in Russia have achieved their FIDs. Now, about Russia, we can say that it has really achieved a lot of maturity in developing technology for this sub-freezing temperature, sub-freezing Arctic region. They have developed structures, they have developed steels for manufacturing, and a lot of technology intensive work has been done in Russia to develop the LNG projects. So now they have the competencies in place. They have the required institutions in place. The 3 major companies, all are involved, and there's a lot of competition between them. So there's a study of OIES which brings out all the enablers of how Russia can achieve 100 MTPA capacity by 2030. So these are the 3 capacities which they are focusing on. And then Indonesia is also coming up on 9.5 MTPA capacity has been approved, but it is waiting FIDs from its Japanese promoters. And basically the delay is to incorporate the CCS measures and the climate change related technologies into the LNG manufacturing. So that is what has delayed the Indonesian facility. Mozambique, well, a beautiful reserve they have, an excellent reserve, massive reserve, and it's being developed by 3 players. So 3.4 MTPA is already under construction, 12.9 MTPA in area 1 is being developed. It achieved its FID. Total is developing it, and the Rovuma LNG in the adjacent area, which is being developed by ExxonMobil and ENI, it has already received the initial investment decision, and it was expected to achieve its FID, but it is delayed, and we'll have to wait. But a lot of work is already going on this project. Papua New Guinea, the FID for the 3-train PNG expansion was running late, but the country has a pre-FID capacity of 12 MTPA. So most of these countries are already well entrenched into the liquefaction train, and they are planning to bring in new capacities. Now coming to LNG shipping, and we are running slightly behind time, and I'll see how fast I can complete that, because we will see what makes LNG shipping a niche business. And then will LNG shipping emerge out of this niche position? And then will the ownership costs attract marine lines to, own shipping vessels, LNG shipping vessels? And will the shipping mature to provide much sought liquidity in the market? And then what are the emerging trends and issues? And I will request the participants that I'll be going a little fast because of the time constraints. I might skip some slides. So these are the key characteristics of the LNG vessels. You need cryogenic containment, and you need good containment to avoid boil off, and approximate costs. It's very expensive to build a vessel, and while a VLCC can cost $90 to $100 million, but an LNG vessel of much smaller capacity, just 170 to 180 cubic meters, 1/4 the size, it still costs about twice of that. So what are the key characteristics of the LNG shipping? First of all, the customized specifications. Everything is customized because it's designed for a long-term contract. The ports for loading and unloading, what are the drafts, what are the navigation aids? So those factors have to be taken in time. The voyage time has to be taken in out to design the utilities and the storage of fuel, etc. So technical specifications for vessels are very specific and customized. The second thing is the limited deployment. You can't deploy an LNG vessel anywhere else other than for the commodity. And the long-term trade also leaves very little room for the deployment, of the laden or of the ballast voyage. You can't take a cargo of LNG on the return. It's not, so far it has not been possible. It may be in future when you have more liquefaction and you have more trades plying between the countries across the globe. A limited fleet, the LNG trade volumes are several times less than crude, and they have very strict take-or pay, and therefore the global fleet size is very limited, and it normally is commensurate with the LNG liquefaction capacities, just about commensurate. This is what we saw, the two types of containments popular, the Moss Rosenberg, now called the Moss Quanner, and then the gas transport and Technigas. Now they are GTT. So the GTT and the Moss technologies, they're the most popular technologies now, and they have a strong legacy. As I showed you, they have been there right from 1960s into this business. Another characteristics of the LNG shipping is that it's an integral part of the LNG value chain. Why? Because the principles of cash flow waterfall, the investment risks in procuring LNG vessels are mitigated by ensuring that the returns entail from the revenue income. And the investment risks are therefore included in the costs for the buyers of LNG. So the ownership then rests with the stakeholders of the project, that is either the producers or the end users or the portfolio players. And this also explains, as told by Dr. Balian yesterday, why the LNG prices are delivery ex-ship or delivered basis, because ownership is already defined, it's already decided. So it remains a very, very niche marine lines who own the fleet and who charter out their ships and who manage them for the LNG liquefaction plants or for the buyers. So 85% of deployment takes place on long-term charters, and the majority of the LNG vessels therefore become an integral part of the value chain for a specific liquefaction facility, and this happens right from the FID stage. Another important factor to be considered is that there's very limited secondary market for sale purchase of LNG vessels. So just like you are able to establish the residual value of a VLCC or a oil carrier, it's very difficult to establish the assessment of the residual value of LNG vessels. Why? Because unlike the normal tankers, you don't have a standard valuation method. So these vessels are not available for sale. Too many of them are not available. So financial borrowing gets constrained as bankers are unable to assess their residual value. So because of that, many of the shipping lines cannot, they've not been able to go into trading of LNG vessels, and LNG vessel ownerships has remained with very, very few elite players or shipping lines with very deep pockets. Let us discuss about the propulsion systems of the LNG shipping, because other than the containment, propulsion systems have a very important bearing on the operational cost of the LNG vessels. So number of propulsion systems are available, and we earlier had the steam turbine driven, but now we have plants, we have these propulsion systems. We take use of the boil off gas as well as different fuels like HFO or marine diesel oils. And now the most popular designs are the dual or triple fuel diesel electric design, DFD or TFD, and the man designed, the electronically controlled gas injection type of engines. They're called the MEGI engines. And then the propulsion systems, the Wärtsilä design, two-stroke, slow speed and dual fuel systems. They're called the XDF design. So these are the two most important systems which have now evolved. Although DFD and TFD were about 20% more efficient, but then they have given way to MEGI and XDF now. And these are the most popular systems now. The costs have also become very comparable. And the efficiencies are also very comparable for these two. So these systems were also developed. Mitsubishi developed the stage system with using steam turbine and gas engines using the waste heat and generating the steam from that, combined cycle kind of a thing. But then we don't have any current orders for this type of propulsion system. ABB's Azipod ARC3 system, Arctic 37. Now this Arctic 7, there were special icebreaker systems. Now LNG in Russia could not have been successful without these kind of vessels. These kind of vessels cost almost 2 to 2.5 times the cost of the normal LNG vessels. And the propulsion system has provision for 360-degree rotation. So we have about 15 vessels, but these vessels are very, very specific only for the Arctic region, for the LNG plants coming in those regions. Now, the recent trends in the order books, they indicate that XDF and MEGI propulsion systems are gaining popularity. And it also indicates that ship owners are now increasingly aligned towards efficiency and lower ownership costs. So now if you see the designs which are coming up in different years, you find that XDF and MEGI, now they are dominating. And so you see that the TFD and DFD, they are now going out. You're going more on XDF, and that only shows that even if the cost is higher, the ship owners, they do want more efficient and better designed propulsion systems. A quick overview of the fleet and the capacity. We have LNG fleet is about 572 with 35 new vessels. This includes FSRUs, the capacity and everything, but then we have the GTT and the MOS technology, and we have 2/3. So this is something just for brevity. I put this slide. We have already discussed it. This also we discussed yesterday. What has happened to the average size of the fleet? It has now matured so that it can take care of both the expanded Suez Canal and the expanded Panama Canal. So these are the some specific features. Age of fleet is very interesting. A key factor is the age of the fleet. So half the fleet is less than 10 years old. Now this is very important because this provides a robustness to the shipping, to the shipping business. Your off-voyage periods in dry docks is likely to be low, and overall reliability of the vessels is going to be much higher when you have a young fleet in service. So that's why I showed this slide, because, and then of course the efficient propulsion systems I'd already shown. But now if you see age-wise, this young, less than 10-year fleet has mostly very efficient systems, bunch of efficient systems. The older fleet had, ex-DFD and DFDs, the steam turbines, mostly steam turbine or steam reheat turbines. But now we have systems which are very efficient. Most of the fleet is of that type. The vessel costs have come down. As we said, the higher prices are there for the 1700 per cubic meters. They are for the icebreakers. And well, till 14, the costs were high, but now with the pressure from the 3 South Korean shipyards, now the prices have come down. All the 3 South Korean shipyards are doing extremely well. Hyundai, Daewoo, and so they are doing extremely well, Samsung. And with more orders for the new Panamax size, the rates have also stabilized to below. So a lot of standardization has also taken place as far as the sizes are concerned. So the normal delivery time has come down. It's now just varies between 30 to 50, depending upon the propulsion systems. And in case you want to order a sister vessel, it can be delivered much shorter. And these are how the vessel costs have gone up. But as per IGU, the vessel's prices for the new built XTF have stable at around $1,100 per cubic meter. Of course, the icebreakers, the class vessels, they have almost 2 times the cost. This is about the fleet availability and the charter rates. As per International Gas Union, the average charter rate in 20 were $1,05,000, $150,000, and $165,000 per day for steam, DF, dual fuel or triple fuels propulsion systems, and for the XTF. XTF were the highest. This is a graph which shows that steam turbines were the lowest. But then the volatility in charter rates is likely to ease out once the markets, they get softer, the shipping markets. So now 64 vessels are due for delivery, and majority of the order book is in short-term and spot trade. The majority of the order book is not for the long-term trade. That is a very, very vital aspect. So fleet utilization, if you see in terms of voyage time, it is now 5757, because there's a lot of sea trade emerging out of America. So the voyage time is slightly more here. But with the onset of export, the voyage time per tanker in 2018 had come down to 10.5 from 11 voyages. The voyages to Europe had increased, of course, due to the spurt in the LNG export. Quickly about the emerging trends before we end. The emerging post-2012 LNG shipping has witnessed a huge paradigm shift. The long-term contracts changed, flexibility were offered, and new orders for LNG vessels, they spelled flexible maneuverability and acceptance at multiple ports, because now you have over 134 ports over the world which can accept LNG vessels. Another visible trend, vessels have been ordered without long-term charters. So number of fleet owners have swelled to well over 65. They are now 68 as per the latest report which I read. 68 ship owners have either ordered or they own vessels. The average vessel capacity is now standardized, and the LNG shipping is characterized by a limited number of loading ports. So now there are 134 LNG discharge ports. So the need of a standard contract has also been felt, and in fact Shell has developed a contract which is called Shell LNG Time, which addresses the issues required for short-term trade and charters. Now another important emerging issue is that IMO and its Marine Environment Protection Committee, it has been considering several measures and regulations to minimize the impact on environment in shipping industry. It is committed to reduce carbon dioxide, NOx, and sulfur emissions. And in 2013, the IMO introduced the energy efficiency design indexes. In 2020, a cap of maximum 0.5% of sulfur in bunker fuels was introduced. And then the new regulations of IMO, they include that energy efficiency existing ship index and the carbon intensity index. Now, this is being discussed in detail, and very soon we'll have regulations for the shipping industry for adhering to these kind of norms, indexes and norms. Now, the older vessels cannot be scrapped, so then there would be new measures which would then alleviate the hazard of emissions. So for the new vessels, the compliance to the norms would have to be very strictly followed. And this was a study on an Oxford study. I just wanted to show you, because just to conclude this session, I showed this slide yesterday also, how LNG liquefaction and shipping costs have emerged across different LNG producing regions. So Oxford made this a study that took data of 7 important exporting regions. And they included Qatar, Nigeria, Mozambique, Russia, Western Canada. And then in the US, they divided the liquefaction exporting plants into 2 categories. The older one, the US Gulf of Mexico, which came up with much higher liquefaction capacities, and then the new Gulf of Mexico plants, which are now coming up, liquefaction plants, and which have much lower liquefaction costs. So for affordability, they picked up 4 markets, and they picked up the India, Pakistan, Bangladesh market, and they set a benchmark of $6 per MMBTU. They said the affordability should be 6, and they found that for supplying to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Qatar, Nigeria, Mozambique, and Russia, they are all in very good position. Even if they produce gas, if they liquefy it and they ship it, they should be able to do under a benchmark of $6. This was a very interesting one. Similarly, they have done it for other countries. Say for Northwest Europe, the Gulf of Mexico, new plants from US, they would be in a position to supply to Europe. So these plants can supply to Europe. These plants can supply to India, Pakistan. And when you come to the richer countries, the high income countries like North and West Europe, and then the high income markets, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Japan, China, they have much higher appetite and they can take almost cargoes for anywhere. This was a very interesting study, which I thought I'll just share with you, because this also brings out the kind of liquefaction costs which are there. There was a very interesting study which I also saw, which I'll see if I can bring it out sometime later during the presentations, and that was how the costs of liquefaction have gone along with the crude oil prices. So they try to link it. So this is a conclusion. LNG liquefaction capacity building has its complexities. Its understanding helps in understanding the nature of trade, LNG trade, the nature of LNG contracts, LNG pricing, shipping. The global LNG liquefaction capacities, along with LNG shipping, are growing at a decent rate. So we have a fair assurance of long-term availability. And there have been cost reductions in developing liquefaction and shipping. So this is roundabout all. I'm sorry I slightly overrun the presentation, but then thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Swami Saab. Very excellent presentation. I'm sure there was too much content in it, and I'll assure the participants that the presentation would be available on our website. So even if you have a query afterwards, you can just put up the question to us and we will forward those questions to the experts later on. So quickly, we will move on to the questions. Swami Saab, I would request you to be very brief in your replies to these questions. If these questions are going to be covered in next session, then you can skip them for now. So the first question is from Mr. Sajjad Hussain. What is the average IRR for LNG liquefaction project, and more specifically the IRR for that Canadian project you discussed?
See, they have kept a very decent margin. If you see the slide of the Canadian LNG, they had kept a very hefty margin. So you can convert that that margin into the IRR. So, and that too, because just a minute, let me just open that interesting slide, because the data was privy and it came out through Oxford. So they have kept a gross margin of $1.5 in a cost of about $7. So you can just imagine the kind of margin which has been kept. And if you say that the $2 of the upstream gas cost in the pipeline tariff already have their inbuilt margins, then the margin is very, very hefty. IRR would be, I would say that the IRR should be much higher at about, say, maybe about 20 or so, 20% or maybe so. I wouldn't be able to exactly say, but you see the gross margin that has been kept, 1.5 over a cost of $7. Pretty decent.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Hina Shakil. I would again request the participants to kindly mention from which organization or which country do they belong. So her question is, do you feel that the economies like Pakistan or SAARC, who are the net consumers, should invest in liquefaction facilities somewhere globally, or they should remain as simple buyer?
The kind of models which are developing, they do offer you an opportunity today to get into the liquefaction. The Tellurian liquefaction, they wanted India to participate, Petronet. So similarly, now options are available, and at the time options were not available. Now the options are there, and if Pakistan, if it finds that it has a long-term requirement of LNG, and it would be worthwhile to go with a developer who can provide long-term basis at very decent cost, who's willing to share the data of the project development costs, then it is worthwhile. One should take in a. It's worthwhile
Okay.
to take an. Worthwhile to take an.
Worthwhile.
But the stakes are very, very high. Only even if you take a 15% stake, it is as good as, you know, installing a plant of 2000 gigawatts, 2000 megawatts or 3000 megawatts. So that is the kind of stakes which you would need to invest into the upstream LNG business.
Yes. So Abhisab, we have a question from Dr. Nawaz Ahmed. His question is that who is more important in making LNG market liquid? Is it LNG producer or LNG importer?
Well, I think it's a two-way cycle now. The LNG marketers, once they have the affiliate model in place, they are assured about the equity. So now they see that if the volatility comes, we may be able to benefit from the liquid part of their LNG sales. When it comes to the importers, for them, it's a very, very huge risk to get involved into a LNG long-term contract for the entire quantities. So for them, liquidity is required to meet and bridge the gaps. When you don't need it, you don't buy it. When you need it, you immediately buy it. So it is like this that today I needed only about, for the month I needed some amount of groceries and I had bought it, and now suddenly I need a little more groceries because my consumption was a little more, then I had more parties and I need more. So I just go to the market and pick it off the shelf. Now at that time, what are the prices that I have to pay? So this is a two-way kind of a thing, but the market, at least the LNG business is being now facilitated towards liquidity. That is the most important point. And we have to see that there are good regulations, there are good hubs, there are good exchanges so that the prices can be kept, the liquid prices of the commodity can be kept at very fair and, very reasonable.
Thank you. So we have a question from Imran Akhtar, who is the Executive Director of Ogra, Pakistan. Can you please comment on the composition of the lean and rich LNG at an appropriate time during the presentation, and which countries produce lean and rich LNG? Yes, Balyar sir, you can speak. Okay. Dr. Balian would like to make comment. I think he's mute himself. Could you unmute yourself, sir?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sansab. Just one comment on the previous question on the backward integration of a equity holder or a shareholder in a liquefaction plant to the upstream it's a good opportunity. To my mind, it has similar opportunities like an upstream company going back, a refiner going back into the upstream. So it does give some advantage of this backward integration in terms of if there are volatility in petroproducts, then you can hedge it with the upstream, your operations there. Or if there is a low crude price regime, then you can perhaps leverage on your petroproducts. So you have more leverage in terms of, and becomes a natural hedging. Similarly, I see in the liquefaction, if you are integrating backwards into your upstream, depending upon the conditions of the contract, if you have an equity gas there and you have an opportunity to take your equity gas, you might be very advantageous there. But if the equity gas is not there and there is a marketing done as a whole, then of course there would be a limited advantage there. But then depending upon the contractor thing, I think it does offer better opportunities if you are integrating backwards right up to the upstream. That's one thing. Now coming to the rich and the lean, this thing, there are few countries which have rich LNG, and I dealt with briefly yesterday that all those who have all basins all have a specific composition, and it varies from composition to basin to countries there. All those where the predominantly it is 88-89% methane, we call it a dry gas. It is predominantly methane, very traces of higher hydrocarbons, helium, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, traces of H2S. These are the normal composition. But where the composition of C2 plus is appreciably high, maybe around 8%, 9%, even sometimes 10%, then it makes sense to really look at what opportunities, what advantages we get it from there. And there are certain countries like Qatar itself is having a rich gas there, and they themselves thought, why not extract out the richer component, because it offers you much more advantages, price advantages, product advantages there. So they put on an extraction plant there and started extracting. Now, of course, they've come back to limited extraction. They're selling it as a rich gas also. Trinidad had rich gas. Papua New Guinea has a rich gas there. So there are countries where you really get composition which are C2 plus is higher. Now, what advantages? Like in India, we have taken a new initiative of extracting out C2 plus component of the methane and extract out, keep it separate, and use this for petrochemicals and other projects, where you can get more value out of the C2 plus extraction than a lean energy. And the entire lean energy comes back after the extraction of the C2 plus to the plant, LNG plant, and it is distributed to all consumers as the pipeline, as a normal pipeline. And this C2 plus, really you can extract higher value through polymerization and to polyethylene, polypropylene, and many other value-added products. So it does give advantage on that. Depending upon the concentration, I think there are companies who are doing this, and perhaps in the world, one of the largest such extraction plant is with us here in Dahej in Gujarat, which is doing very
well. I think we will take one more question, which is from Mr. Imran Akhtar. Another question: is third-party access practiced in LNG liquefaction facilities worldwide? Is third-party access practiced in liquefaction facilities worldwide? Okay, the same question. Yes.
Yeah, sir. Should I answer?
Yeah, Rajiv, go ahead.
So in India, we have been able to use this model, and one of the facilities in US, we have brought an entire chain, not bought it, but done tolling arrangement there. So effectively, we own that liquefaction train, and as Dr. Balyan put it, if you have access to local gas, then you get that gas, equity gas if you want, or you buy that gas of a hub, use the tolling facility of liquefaction, If you have your own ships, then you can use those ships, or maybe you can charter hire a ship if it's a single cargo, or if it's a strip of cargoes, then you can charter hire for a longer term. Longer term, hiring can be done. And so that model is very effective, working, and India, we have been able to, successfully use it. And similar models are available. You could actually invest in a liquefaction train. You could invest, you can use it as a tolling facility. You can lease it out. So all those models are available today across the world.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Rajiv sir. So I think we can address the rest of the questions after the second presentation. We are lacking behind on our schedule. So we quickly thank you very much, Swami sir, for an excellent presentation and replying to those questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, we would like we would just skip the break just to save our time. So the next presentation would be from Mr. Rajiv Mathur. The presentation title is Global LNG Trade, brief history of global LNG trade, key suppliers and consumers, LNG market liquidity, break-even cost of LNG export projects, upcoming cross-border pipelines and their impact on LNG trade. Mr. Rajiv Mathur is an engineer by profession, having a master's degree in business administration with specialization in marketing management, and has over 35 years of experience in the oil and gas sector. He has been the president, policy and growth of KN Energy India, one of the largest private sector companies in the oil and gas sector in India. So over to Mr. Rajiv for his presentation.
Thank you, Asan Saab. Thank you, Sark Energy Center, for giving me an opportunity to, present my views on global LNG trade. It is a challenge, to speak after some listed speakers like Dr. Balyan and Mr. Prasad and others. And many of the subjects that I am going to talk about already have been addressed to some extent, but I will try to do justice to, the global LNG trade, which is a topic that I have to speak on today. Of course, in the earlier sessions, we've heard from Dr. Balyan about gas and LNG demand, what are the key challenges that are there, and Mr. Prasad talked about the LNG liquefaction facilities. He also talked about shipping, and then how the liquefaction facilities are growing. Also, he talked about shipping and how the shipping industry is also evolving over a period of time. So I will, in my session, take you through, one brief history of LNG trade, how it has evolved. Some of it might be a repetitive thing, but then nevertheless, I think to appreciate how the trade has grown, I would like to present it again. We will talk about who the LNG suppliers are and who the LNG consumers are, which are the major ones, which are the new ones which are coming up. Then we will talk something about how the liquidity is created in the market. Also, we will talk about one or two projects, we discussed in the past session about Canadian projects and what is the IRR kind of a thing. So we will see how, some of these projects, what the pricing structure, etc. is. Although pricing is in the next session, but to have a break even, what is the kind of pricing that they would desire to have. Also, in brief, we will discuss about the pipelines, the transnational pipelines, and that how they are playing a role in the overall energy balancing across the world, and whether they have an impact on the LNG trade per se. So this is in brief that I will discuss, and let's skip everything and go to the first slide on LNG evolution. So how LNG has evolved over a period of time, Mr. Prasad also dwelt over this. So it first started in 1940 when a LNG facility was created in Cleveland, Ohio. And as he said that, from a single tank, there were 4 tanks. And then after some accident happened, there was spillage. And as a
Yeah,
result,
Rajesh sir, can I intervene? Can you just put this on the full screen mode?
okay, just 1 minute.
Yes, sir, sure. Thank you.
Is it visible full screen now?
Perfect, perfect, sir, perfect. Go ahead.
So the LNG facility at Cleveland, Ohio was the first emergence of liquefied natural gas business. So, although it ended up with an accident, but that was a learning for the entire, LNG business or LNG trade as to, how to, bring in safety and safety mechanism into place to ensure that liquefied gas is traded because it is easily transportable after. And that was the outcome of the 1940 experiment that was done in Cleveland, Ohio. The first transatlantic shipment thereafter happened in a ship called Methane Pioneer. It happened from Lake Charles, Louisiana to UK. And this, as I said, was because in liquefied form, we have seen that the gas gets compressed 600 times, and therefore it, uses a much lesser space, the same amount of energy, to be easily transportable over long distances. So while in gaseous forms, pipelines are the real mode of transportation because it doesn't make economic sense to transport in a gaseous form unless it is compressed to 250 bar or more to occupy a lesser space. Once it becomes liquid, then, of course, the space requirement goes down, the economics of transportation goes up, and if you have vessels which can take large volumes, then the cost of transportation, etc., becomes quite economical, and that allows transportation over thousands of kilometers. And so by that logic, the first shipment which happened across the Atlantic was in 1958, and that was the pioneering effort of, cross-continental export of energy in form of liquid gas. Then in 1964, the first commercial LNG facility was established in Algeria, and this primarily was supplementing the pipeline gas which was flowing from Africa into Europe. And Europe, as you know, requires a lot of gas or energy. They mainly require it for space heating, and they also require it for power generation, which are the two major requirements. And as the temperatures, as you know, go down, the space heating requirements goes up exponentially. And therefore, Europe was the ready market for Algerian gas, which was found, in Algeria. Of course, it was hinterland gas in the desert, and they had to, ship it, take it through a pipeline to the terminal liquefaction facility, which was there. And from there, they used ships in 1964 to transport it to France and UK. So that was the first commercial model which was there established through long-term agreements to transport and deliver gas across continents after the first experiment that was there between US and UK. In 1969, there were 3 more trades that happened. Of course, Algeria to France, then one from Libya to Italy, and then to Spain, and one from Alaska to Japan. So Alaska to Japan was also a new initiative which was undertaken, and it was the first Pacific project which allowed transportation of gas from one continent to another and delivery of LNG. So this in around 1970s or so, it established the commercial basis of export of gas as a form of energy from one continent to another. And this model, more so ever for Japan, because Japan was devoid of any conventional form of energy which it could utilize in a large manner, and therefore it was importing in a big way oil, and that got supplemented by the use of natural gas in Japan. And that is how you will see in the next session, when we talk about pricing and other things, that Japan established the basis of what should be the pricing indexation. And since they were importing oil in a big way, the benchmarking of gas that came into Japan was based on the import of crude oil that was happening and the price that they were required to pay for import of crude oil. So as long as the price of gas that they were importing in form of LNG was competitive or equivalent or thereabouts to the price of crude oil that they were importing into Japan, it did make a lot of sense. And therefore, they ventured into long-term agreements to secure their energy volumes. And these transshipments that happened around the 1970 or so from US to Japan established that yes, gas could on a competitive basis be imported into Japan, and that is how the Japanese market started evolving and developing. In 1972, US entered into the market, and they made their first deliveries within Massachusetts, within the American continent, the North America itself, and they established their market within the US. Coming to 1978, there were larger contracts that came in, and large contracts by El Paso into Colombia gas system for a coke point. There was a facility that got created there, then Elba Islands. All these started developing within the American continent for areas which were devoid of energy, devoid of gas, and as you know, those are colder climates and they require a lot of energy. And so the shipment of in the form of LNG started happening within the US and islands and other areas which were not fed by any other form of energy. So and then as we went along, since the confidence level of the LNG business started growing, a number of countries came into exporting LNG, liquefaction facilities started coming in. Some of the importing countries experienced comfort in the the reliability of imports that were happening and the assurance in terms of volumes available in time of the energy that they were importing. This gave confidence to a lot of other countries to start looking at LNG in a big way. And therefore this trade evolved and grew in the 1980s, and thereafter a lot of new countries which had resources of natural gas, they came into the picture since their economies were based on export of energy. So countries like Australia, countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and several other countries, Nigeria, etc., they started setting up liquefaction facilities. And on the other side, there were a lot of countries which realized that gas had a better future. It was a cleaner fuel. It was a better hydrocarbon. The usage of gas and its applications were there in several forms. And if gas was available in rich form, as in the last session we talked about, then it had many other components beyond methane, things like ethane, propane, butane, hexane, etc., which could be stripped out, and those could be utilized for different other purposes. For example, production of fertilizers, or for that matter, it could be stripped out and used as LPG or ethane, etc., could be utilized for production of polymers. So all that allowed a lot of countries to start importing LNG in a big way. And of course, those who were able to do it, the rich gas that was available, they set up facilities for processing and stripping of higher value-added components. The others straight away utilized it for energy purposes. In 2010-11, while US had made up its mind to become a big importer of LNG, and you would all recall that a lot of LNG facilities got set up to import. Regas facilities were set up across US to import LNG in a big way. And a lot of companies invested in regas facilities. The breakthrough at that very point of time happened in terms of how exploitation of resources of natural gas which were available within the US could happen. And this happened through horizontal directional drilling, something which is known as fracking, and the gas and oil which were trapped in the seams of fracking, rock components which had not been able to flow through, vertical wells, which was a conventional way of taking out oil or gas. The technology of horizontally drilling and making small pebbles or crushing the stone to allow the gas and oil to flow within those reservoirs, that became a success. And once that became a success, all those reserves which hitherto could not be commercially exploited, the US was able to exploit them in a big way, and therefore started the shale boom. And in the shale boom, the shale gas boom became one of the largest milestones as far as the gas business in the 21st century can be thought about. And this allowed US to become an exporter instead of an importer. And lo and behold, all the regas facilities which were created and huge investments had gone into it, they actually had to be either mothballed, or the investors had to think of an alternate way of converting those into liquefaction facilities. And therefore, you would see that a lot of regas facilities over a period of time have been converted into liquefaction facilities across the US. And some of them are still mothballed and over a period of time are getting converted. To cut the story short, around 2010-11 or so, the first shipment of LNG export out of US started happening. And today, you will see as going forward that US is becoming one of the largest exporters of LNG across the world. Quickly going into the history again, I think I will. The early projects developed in 70s, and why they developed was there was a price shock in oil. And if you recall, in early 70s, around 1974, the crude oil prices went up to $40 a barrel, and at that time, $40 was like $400 per barrel of oil today. And people had to think of using gas, which was actually flared at that point of time, as a productive form of energy. And a lot of nationalization of industries happened. There were price shocks. Some countries were not able to afford the use of crude oil, and they looked at gas in an alternate manner. And therefore, gas became a commodity which had not been given the due respect or due importance before that. Then, of course, LNG imports into Europe happened. The trade within the US did not, grow to that extent. And later, as I said, the interest shifted to, the Pacific Ocean countries like Korea, countries like Taiwan, who were in need of a lot of energy and who did not have their own domestic resources, and they joined Japan as one of the largest importers of LNG, late 80s or thereabouts, and even today they are probably one of the largest importers.
Rajasthan, if I could intervene, could you kindly
Yeah.
go through these slides quickly, because we would have not enough time to have a discussion on your.
I know, I understand. So I think I will
Thank
skip
you.
all these and you leave it to you for the participants to read them at leisure. And so now coming back to the current situation, we have LNG trains set up in countries like Qatar, which are big time exporters, about 8 million tons a single train, and there are several new trains which are coming up, and they've been running flawlessly for 10 to 15 years at a stretch. And the recent boom in the US has allowed a lot of LNG to be exported out of US, and therefore a lot of gas is available across the world, as we saw in the last presentations, and there are a lot of LNG exporters which are there. I will again not dwell on this slide, because we have different elements of the LNG trade, and each element of this trade has to play its role for the LNG trade to grow and become a success. And therefore, answering a question which was posed earlier, while the people who need gas, which are the importers, have a big role to play, it is equally for people who are setting up the liquefaction facilities. It is equally for the shipping industry to evolve, and for the regas facilities to be there for the entire trade to grow and become successful going forward. Coming quickly to who are the key suppliers and who are the key consumers across the world. So today we have about, the suppliers have grown over the last 20, 30 years. And today we have about 20 suppliers. So we have a heterogeneous, set of suppliers which are available across the world today. Qatar is, till you will see as we go forward, has been one of the largest suppliers, over 77 million tons of liquefaction facilities it has, and consistently it is supplying huge volumes of LNG across the world. Then we have Australia, which is again one of the largest suppliers, and in fact, as we go ahead and see in a couple of slides going forward, it has become the largest exporter of LNG today in the world. Then, as we talked about US has got several facilities which have come up in the recent times, in the last decade or so, or even less than that, and it has become one of the largest exporters. Algeria was the original exporter, as I said, and it started the LNG trade in a big way. Russia is also one of the largest exporters today. Then we have Nigeria, we have Indonesia, we have Malaysia, we have Trinidad, Tobago, we have Oman, we have UAE and Papua New Guinea. So these are the 12 countries in that order, which are the largest suppliers of LNG across the world. And there are several others. There are about 8 or 10 more suppliers across the world. So for any buyer, I think they have enough options which are available across the world to look at various supply facilities, should they be interested in trading or buying gas from any of these suppliers. So coming quickly to where all the exports are happening from. As I said, Qatar is the largest exporter today, largest supplier. In the year 2020, this is calendar year 2020, they did about 206 billion cubic meters of exports, roughly 75 to 80 million tons of LNG they exported. Then it was followed by Australia, again did almost equivalent amount, and in fact recently Australia has overtaken Qatar as the largest exporter of LNG, and together between two of them they have about 40% share of the export market today. The other major exporters today are US, which has about 13-14% share, and the share is only growing year on year. They did about 66 billion tons of billion cubic meters of LNG exports, and also, a lot of countries in Asia put together, they exported about 14-15 million tons. So in these, you have countries like Oman, you have UAE, you have countries like Malaysia, you have countries like Indonesia, etc. So they were all exporters, and then the African countries, Nigeria, Algeria, etc. They were also exporters. So all told, the exports have grown. If you look at the chart on the left side, in the year 2020, we did about 450 billion cubic meters of LNG exports that happened across the world. And if you see that in the last 3 or 4 years, the exports have only grown. There was some amount of dip which we saw last year, and that is primarily due to COVID and demand destruction which happened, and because the economies could not run in the same manner as they were doing in the past, and that is the reason why there was a dip. Now, if you quickly look at the key consumers, there are today over 40 consumers across the world, and the largest consumer has been Japan in the last decade or so. China is fast, becoming the largest consumer across the world today, and the demand in China has grown by leaps and bounds. We have South Korea, which is one of the largest importers, across the world today. Then India, in the last 15-20 years, it has become one of the largest importers of LNG. Then we have Chinese Taipei, which traditionally has been importing a lot of LNG, and also is one of the largest importers today. In Europe, Europe is in a unique position of getting piped natural gas. It is in a position to get LNG, and it has some resources of its own of natural gas in North Sea and other places. So while it uses a lot of LNG, but LNG practically has been used in the past decade or so as a swing fuel. So what the quantity of LNG that is imported into into Europe squarely depends on how much imports of piped gas are happening from Africa, from Russia, etc., and how much they are able to produce within the European Union and UK, and how much storage capacity and what is the level of storage that they have. That squarely depends as to how much LNG they are expected to import, during a year. And Spain and France actually traditionally have been huge importers, and they have also become re-exporters. So at times, while they have to, because of their commitments, they have to import a lot of LNG. They find markets and they re-export. And at times, ship just berth in the LNG ports, and then they are diverted to some other markets or some other user who is willing to buy that cargo, the entire cargoes. So then, of course, UK is also traditionally a big market. Italy, Turkey lately has become an importer, and now they found a lot of gas also. So we'll see how they balance out between imports and exports. Pakistan, of course, over the last in the last decade has become a big importer, and also Bangladesh has got 2 or 3 terminals which have come up recently and become a large importer. So these are some 10 or 12 countries which constitute the major trade of imports that are happening in the across the world. And as I said, there are about 40 odd consumers. So while there are 20 odd suppliers, there are over 40 odd importers that are there, and that makes LNG trade much more fungible, much more liquid, with more and more exporters and more importers coming into place. I will not go detail into the statistics here, but as I said, Japan, China, Korea, India, Japan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc. They over year on year, their imports are growing, and that is creating a lot of liquidity in the market, either in terms of long-term agreements or short-term or even spot buying, which they are doing. And this is again the same chart in a pie chart, and then it shows the other countries also. We can maybe later on dwell on it if required. Do I need to stop for a minute for any questions, or I carry on? Hasan Saab?
Sir, yes, sir. I think you should carry on with your presentation. We will address all the questions at the end of presentations.
Okay. So coming quickly to global LNG trade, first I'm showing the chart of 2019 and then I'll show 2020. Why I'm showing 19 is 19 was a usual year for the LNG business to have happened, and 20 had implications of COVID, some amount of demand which was destructed, and some industries and countries could not maintain their GDP, economic growth, etc. in the manner it was done in 2019. So if we quickly come to the year 2019, the global trade was over 350 million tons, and this was an increase of over 13% over the previous year, which was 2018, and these are calendar years we are talking about. So the LNG trade has been growing on a compounded basis by over 10%, in the recent past. And while we talked on the left side, if we see, there are the exporting countries. Qatar had 77 million tons of export capacity. Australia had 75 million tons. Russia did about 30 million, and US was coming up, in a big way as an exporter. On the right side, if we look, Japan imported 77 million tons. China did about 62. Then South Korea and other Asian countries did about 77 million tons. And Asia Pacific became the largest market as far as the use of LNG is concerned, or the trade of LNG is concerned. And as imports surged, the European Union also, because 2019 the prices were quite competitive as far as the European Union is concerned. So they almost doubled their imports to about 85 million tons. And if we look at the trade, flows which happened, Australia into China was a major trade flow of LNG, and Japan imported from Malaysia, Indonesia, Russia, US, everywhere. Japan had several countries from which it was importing. Similarly, if you look at South Korea, they were also importing from Australia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Russia. So heterogeneous set of suppliers and a heterogeneous set of importers. If you look at countries like India, we had long-term agreements with Qatar, so that probably is the largest strip that you see. But the imports were happening from as far as Australia and as far as Trinidad Tobago also on the other side, and US, of course. Quickly coming to year 2020, the trade did not grow much because, as I said, COVID and its impact led to a plateauing of the demand and trade, and it was around 356 million tons in the year 2020. But what is important is that Australia became the largest exporter, and they overtook Qatar during the year 2020. Of course, Qatar again did about 77 million tons. And US, as I said, because of shale gas revolution and number of liquefaction facilities that have come up, they became the third largest exporter across the world. And they did about 10 or 12 million tons more than the previous year. Russia, of course, was a stable exporter. They exported both piped gas as well as LNG and they were the 4th largest exporter across the world. On the other side, you would notice that while Japan demand had plateaued out and there were questions as to whether they should use more LNG or they should go in for nuclear or some renewables. China, the imports started growing, and they did about 69 or 70 million tons of LNG imports. And the largest flow again happened in the Asia Pacific region. Imports into India also grew, and they plateaued out as far as the European Union is concerned. I will not dwell too much on this slide, but it just talks about that. If you notice, of the 356 million tons of trade which happened across the world, about 130 million tons was in Asia Pacific region, about 90 or 100 million tons was in Middle East, and the rest was there in the other parts of the world. And therefore, as far as either exports or imports are concerned, Asia Pacific or the South Asian region, to be specific, is the largest growing market across the world today. This chart talks about demand, and the other element which is there is that there has to be some basis of the trade to happen, and demand plays a very major role as far as the trade facilitation is concerned. And this chart was showed by Dr. Balyan yesterday. I am just repeating it, to give you some sense of direction that the demand across the world for natural gas and LNG is only growing. So whether it be Americas, whether it be Europe, whether it be Middle East, or whether it be Asia, the demand is growing. And as I said, the largest growth is happening in Asia. And the projection suggests that increasingly going forward, LNG demand in Asia will continue to grow much more. The reason is that while domestic production is being encouraged in most Asian countries because of the energy requirements and the GDP growth which is happening, the domestic production is unable to keep pace with the energy requirements. And also, per capita energy consumption has been quite low traditionally in the Asian countries. And therefore, it gives rise to, the occasion where the deficit in energy requirements is required to be met through some form of energy. And as was put yesterday, that amongst the hydrocarbons, natural gas or LNG is probably the best fuel to have. It is the cleanest fuel. Its burning qualities are better. It's it's safe. And whilst we look at transiting to cleaner fuels and renewables going forward, but a lot of effort is required going forward in investments in renewables. And also, if hydrogen and other forms of energy do come up, as the people are talking about, it will take a couple of years or even decades for them to capture some share of the energy basket. Until that happens, as we graduate from coal and crude oil, which are supposedly more polluting, natural gas will not only be a transiting fuel, it will be the destination fuel as far as Asia Pacific is concerned and Asian countries per se are concerned going forward. And this will increasingly create more trade and imports, should the gas production within these countries don't keep pace. On the liquefaction plants, I will not dwell too much, but enough liquefaction capacities have got created in the past. And if you look at 2020, there were about 450 million tons of liquefaction capacity that got created. Additions were about 20 million tons of capacities. Australia, increased the capacity to about 90 million tons per annum export capacity. Qatar was at 77 million tons, but recently they have announced another 30 million tons kind of a thing. And I'm told there'll be 8 million ton LNG trains, 4 or 5 trains that they are planning to put up. So that will take their LNG export capacity to over 110 million tons going forward. And this will create a huge market for Qatar, especially in Asia Pacific, because shipping costs will be lower and accessibility for Qatar to the Asian markets will be much more robust as compared to, and competitiveness, because these are brownfield projects. Costing of LNG would also be quite competitive going forward, hopefully so. Then, of course, US is coming up in a big way, and they added 20 million tons in the last year. Huge new capacities are being planned. As Dr. Balyan told us, about 900 million tons of pre-FID is being done, out of which about 350 million tons is only in US. About 50 million tons is in Australia, and then Canada and other countries are also talking in a big way. And with all these capacities getting constructed, or even if 20-30% of them mature going forward, we will have enough liquefaction capacities and new countries where these liquefaction capacities are being set up, which will create enough liquidity in the market and options for the buyers to look at buying LNG from. And the beauty is that if you look at this map of the world, the LNG liquefaction plants are being set up in all continents. So whether it be North America, huge capacities being set up, whether it be South America, which actually had no liquefaction capacities till some time ago, some capacities are coming up. If you look at Africa, newer countries like Angola, Equatorial Guinea, Cameroon, and even Mozambique, which is not shown here, are coming up. You have Egypt, you have Algeria, etc., etc. So a lot of new capacities coming up in these countries. And then if you look at Middle East also, the capacities are getting raised, and options are there. Even countries like Saudi, for example, Saudi Arabia have got huge volumes of gas. They have not announced any LNG project, but there are capacities in Yemen which are not operational as of now. So, and then Australia. If you look at Australia on the other side, huge capacities are there, and getting created in Papua New Guinea. Then there are capacities in Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, and in Sakhalin, and also in the Arctic. Couple of new projects are coming up. So while the LNG liquefaction facilities come up in all these parts of the world, it will allow crisscrossing of LNG to happen from one continent to another. It will also allow, should the challenge be that the pricing structure for import from, for example, Alaska into say the Asian countries becomes a challenge, or for that matter from US to Asian countries becomes a challenge. Things like swapping or shipping, redirection of shipping routes could also be going forward, evolving in a much larger manner. And actually, whereas if you see, traditionally shipping was point to point, now on a speculative basis, a lot of shipping is happening, a lot of ships are being built. That is also creating a lot of liquidity, and with the LNG facilities being there across the board in all continents, optimization will be the name of the game to meet the pricing and other market challenges. These are details of how much each country is producing. I will not dwell into this. And again, liquefaction capacities, the utilization rate was around 80% in the past, and as new capacities come up and demands grow, this capacity utilization rate is likely to grow. But as new liquefaction facilities come up, a lot of these facilities will have brownfield expansions or debottlenecking happening, which will allow a lot of LNG on short-term or spot basis to be available from these liquefaction facilities. Now, looking at what impact of COVID has had on the investments in the oil and gas sector, quickly, what has happened is that while traditionally the oil and gas industry has been spending about 150 to 160 billion dollars on an annual basis, a lot of these companies and the countries have slashed their investments in the year 2020, and the slashing has been up to 20 or 25%. And you would notice that every project that is announced or FID is taken, it takes between 3 to 7 years for them to actually mature and start producing or start delivering. And if in the year 2020, 20% or 25% of the budgets get slashed, the impact is cascading and felt over the next 3, 4, 5 years, and that is what is going to determine how much liquidity or contraction, not contraction, but rigidity, or for that matter tightness in the market, should I use the word tightness in the market, would be there, or flexibility would be there. Also, if you look at the chart on the right side, it talks of the investment FIDs happening year on year, and the forecast of FIDs, which actually was there. This chart shows forecast, but actually FIDs were also in the same line in the year 2020. So if FIDs don't happen, then and get shifted to next year or year after, the liquefaction capacities that get created also get shifted by a year, 2 or more, and that imbalances the market. While imbalance in the market between demand supply is a good sign for trading to happen, but it creates elements of tightness or elements of flexibility or easiness in the market, and that determines how the prices or the various stakeholders behave. Receiving terminals also are getting added in 2020. Not much happened, but there were 850 million tons of global capacity that was available at the beginning of this year. New capacities are getting added. So while 450 million tons of liquefaction, over 900 million tons of regas capacities, and new capacities are getting planned in new countries. Some of the new markets that have opened up, even in China, new terminals have come up. In India, they have come up. In China, is Taipei, they have come up. In US, they have come up. Countries like Brazil, countries like Croatia, etc., they are setting up new facilities. All that is auguring well for the trade to increase going forward. So at the beginning of 2021, there were 840 million tons of capacity, 30 new terminals in the offing going forward. Japan, in spite of plateauing out on the demand, still had 25% of the regas capacities. New terminals have come up in countries like Myanmar. In 2021, countries like Croatia, Brazil, etc., they are coming on board, which will create a larger consumer base for liquidity to happen. Then new countries, new markets which are developing, countries like Ghana, El Salvador, Morocco, Ivory Coast, Cyprus, Nigeria, and Germany, etc. So all that augurs well for the trade to develop and grow going forward. How it will impact the trade is that while average utilization level of regas facility is about 45 to 50%, it will allow third-party access to these terminals. It will allow newer shippers to use the tolling facility and ship the product and market it. It will allow portfolio players and traders to come in. It will allow meeting of peak requirements, seasonal requirements. For example, in winter, a lot of energy requirements grow in countries which are cold. It will ensure security of supply to nations which are running short of volumes. And coming to the next slide, the trading routes are also growing. So while I showed in the previous slides how the the LNG export facilities are growing across continents, the demand centers, as we noticed in the last slide, are also growing. Countries importing are growing. So it is creating new shipping routes across the world. And not only new point-to-point shipping routes, there are occasions where portfolio players or traders or even suppliers, point-to-point suppliers, are looking at arbitrage, looking at opportunities to cut costs on these trading routes, because shipping, as you saw and Mr. Prasad showed, is a sizable $1 to $2.50, depending on how long the voyage is. So if you are able to cut $1 or more in optimizing your route or your shipping distance and save that amount, then you are opening up a competitive market to use LNG in a big way. So all those opportunities are rising, and this shows how crisscrossing of shipping routes and trading is happening across the world. I'm running out of time. So what creates liquidity? As I said, there are two sides of the coin. One is the supply side, one is the demand side. The supply side is getting created by larger liquidity capacities which are coming up. It is getting created by shipping fleets, 572 active vessels, 35 new delivered in 2020, when some of them had no markets to and were built on speculative basis. So all those are getting added, and which are available for players to on short haul voyages, on single cargo basis, on strip cargo basis. And then there are what is augured well is development of LNG hubs. So a lot of new LNG hubs are getting created across the world, and lot of markets re-exports are happening. I talked of Spain, I talked of France. Similarly, Singapore is a big market, re-export market developing in Asia, and it is developing like a hub where imports are happening, storage capacities are getting built. You could actually buy LNG cheap, store it in Singapore, hire a tank, store it there, and then re-export it either to your own market or where you find arbitrage. So these kind of models are getting developed on the supply side, which are creating a lot of trading opportunities. Similarly, in India, the Kochi terminal has been used in the past for re-exports. So they have tankage there. It was not being utilized fully, and the opportunity of storing was there, and that was gainfully utilized. And similar new opportunities are arising, and this model is developing very well across the world. So ship loading and transshipment, which had not been thought about in the past, is now becoming one of the models of and transshipment. By transshipment, I mean within the country from a larger port, a larger ship, which decants the LNG into the tankage at LNG terminal. There a small ship or a barge comes, and a small fill in that barge or smaller ship takes the product into markets within the nation through shipping routes or through some rivers, or where the either the pipelines are not there, or localized small LNG regas facilities are available. So coming to demand side, what is creating liquidity is one of the major things which is creating liquidity is the term of the contract. In the past, when we started our business in LNG business in the late 90s, we discovered that there were only 25-year contracts that were on offer. there were very few suppliers, and there was a LNG club, so-called club, available at that time, and though there were a couple of suppliers who were determining what the terms were there, and who decided that the term should be 25 years because the financing of the project was based on a 25-year long-term LNG contract to be signed and sealed, which will determine how the financing of the liquefaction facility and upstream facilities will happen. From then, we have come a long way in the last 25 years to contracts. The average long-term life of a contract today is now 10 to 11 years. And there are several long-term contracts, so-called long-term contracts, which are 5 to 7 years now, which are getting signed. Now, what is happening is those contracts which are signed about 25 or 30 years ago, with a 25, 30-year term, they are getting over now. Periodically, over the next couple of years, a huge number of contracts will get over. And in the next slides, I will show you the size, the quantum of contracts getting over. Those are coming up for renewal. They are coming up renewal with shorter terms. Now, rightly or wrongly, I don't know, people are looking at shorter terms, and therefore short term or spot or strip demands are coming into vogue, and that is creating liquidity. Then the other portion, the point which is creating liquidity into the market, is the growing LNG capacity. We saw how regas capacity is growing, and within that regas capacity, since utilization level is around 40–50%, now the equity holders or the owners started questioning, should I keep it either mothballed or not utilized, or should I put it to good use? And if there is energy demand in my country, or in the markets which are accessible through this terminal, why don't I give this capacity to a third party who can access my facilities, who can access my tankage, use this terminal, pay me some tolling fee, and transport the LNG or regasified LNG through pipelines to the markets. So these kind of capacity holders are also growing. So these are third parties not having assets of their own, but they are players, small, big, or trading players, which are growing across the world, and they are bringing in a lot of liquidity. And then, of course, access, either through regulation, law, or even capacity holders, the original investors, they are allowing access to third parties of their terminals. And then over the last decade or so, a new set of players have come in. These are LNG traders. These traders are portfolio players or commodity players in coal, oil, and other things. They have also graduated to natural gas, and they have found that this is a growing market. And these traders have also started accessing either liquefaction or regas or shipping or all of them, and that has allowed a lot of liquidity happening in the market. Then the other thing which is allowing liquidity to happen is the quick either the shortening of the construction period of the land-based liquefaction and regas facilities. Here I am talking of regas facilities, or the new introduction of FSRUs. A lot of ships which were going out of business, which were 25, 30-year-old and had no market left for transporting gas, these ships were available for refurbishment, putting up a regas facility on top of the ship itself, and quickly coming to markets which had, if they were to set up a land-based facility, it would have taken 3, 4, 5 years. And here is, in 12 to 18 months, you could easily refurbish a ship, bring it and dock it at the port where the demand is, with a small pipeline of maybe 2, 5, or 10 kilometers. You could actually access the market in 18 months flat. So this has created a lot of liquidity in the market. Also, new applications like LNG bunkering, which is fueling the ships, fueling the barges, fueling the boats, and even tugboats and other things in ports. and then LNG truck loading, taking it to virtual pipelines, taking it to markets. Also LNG trucking itself using LNG as a fuel. Then what is creating more arbitrage? The price arbitrage across the world is also creating a lot of market. And also weather seasonality, which is changing. We see a lot of temperature variations. We see a lot of seasonality variations. We see a lot of climate impact change which is happening. All this is leading to liquidity. I think I will skip most of the other slides. There is a lot to say, but I mean, I'll just maybe one or two more slides. See how the LNG contracts.
Yes, I think we can allow you 5 more minutes if you have to wrap it up in.
Okay.
No problem.
So look at this slide. I've skipped a couple of slides, which I'll be happy to share with all the audience, and they can later on ask questions if required. But on LNG contracts, which is singular largest means of creating liquidity, you see how over 2020 to 2030, 110 million tons equivalent LNG contracts are getting over, which were 25 or 30-year contracts in the past, signed in the past. Now this demand is not going away. In fact, demand is going much higher here. And therefore, these contracts, as they vanish, and rightly or wrongly, people are going in for 5-year, 10-year, or even smaller, term contracts. What will happen is all these contracts will need, volumes to be supplemented by short-term contracts or spot contracts or term, and therefore it will create huge amount of liquidity in the market in the next 10 years. And these are real agreements, and the dates on which they are getting over, all that captured here across the world. If you come to the middle slide, now this slide talks of in the last 10 years how portfolio players are overtaking the end use players. So while in the past there was one seller, one buyer, one person who had the access to the liquefaction facility, one person who had the gas to be liquefied, and at the other end there was one entity who was buying, and it had the market. So it created no opportunity for an added, either the added player or added opportunity for, the trade to happen. Now, if you look at how from 2010 to 2020, the portfolio players, the number of players and the volume and the buying of these players is only growing year on year. And end use players, their share actually is going down. So what it suggests is that from bulk buyers, large volume, limited buyers, a huge number of new buyers are coming in. Now they may actually be actual users, they may be just third party, they may be portfolio players, or they may be partially using it themselves and then using the arbitrage as an opportunity to sell within their own markets or resell. All that is going to create a lot of liquidity going forward. And the other thing which is coming up, you see the slide on the right side, is the access to regas terminals. Earlier, the person or the entity who used to invest in the regas terminal was the person holding the capacity, buying the LNG, selling the LNG in the market, and no third party had any access whatsoever. Now, even if you are not an equity holder, you are not an investor, you can access the capacities of existing LNG regas facilities. Year on year, the number of people who had access is growing. Now, in 10 years, the number of regas capacity holders in Japan, China, India, and Korea, these are 4 countries for which data is here, has grown from 30 to 50. And this number is only growing year on year. Now, what is happening is in many of these countries, there was no regulation as to how to access a terminal. But over a period of time, regulations are evolving in these countries. The regulator or the governments or whosoever is the national authority is allowing third party access, whether it is partial or unused capacity or even single cargo basis availability, should it be available. And on top of it, tanks are getting created. You know, a lot of these regas facility holders are creating additional tankage. Now, whether it is for their own use or partial use or being let out for storage and use by third parties, all that is creating opportunities not only for regas holders but for third party players to access the entire LNG game. And you know, as the number of these importers and the number of capacity holders grow, the trade will continue to grow exponentially. All these numbers suggest that, you know, trade is going to grow, and the demand is only going to grow much faster as compared to the investments and the capacity that are getting created. And what it suggests going forward is that there is going to be some kind of tightness in the market. And why I'm saying so, this just one more slide, I'm going to talk about one or two specific projects which have come in, which were scheduled to come in the year 2022-23 based on investments made in the past, have got delayed, and see what their impact would be. Now, this is one slide on Mozambique LNG project. Now, the slide on the left suggests that if the capacities are growing faster, the LNG liquefaction capacity, it is loosening of market trade. If the capacities are slowing down or not coming up and demand continues to grow in the manner it is supposed to, it suggests tightening of market. So while 21, 22, 23, based on the investments made in 15, 16, 17, were supposed to be loose markets, meaning thereby a lot of LNG will be available, prices will not go up, and a lot of players will have access to LNG, and demand may not keep pace with the amount of LNG that is available. We have been proved wrong as far as 21 is concerned. People would have noticed in South Asia itself how price of LNG is now $20, $30 or even more. Forget the term contracts which are not fully covering the entire demand. So even this has not, this chart is not showing the reality it was made last year when the COVID was there. Now what is happening is that, you know, because of Mozambique, a lot of law and order issues and other issues, you know, the project is getting delayed. And had it come in time, it would have come around 23, 24. So what it would have done is that it was showing a deficit market and tightening of market at that time. Now this project is getting delayed, and because of getting delayed, what is happening is there are on this right side you show is shown three projects of similar kind, two in Mozambique, close to each other, which are getting delayed, and because of them, the availability of LNG which would have happened is getting shifted year on year. And these dots here show what kind of LNG liquefaction capacity would have worked, and this LNG would have become available, which is getting shifted to next year, and similarly to next year. So as this LNG is not surfacing because of a delay in these projects, this quantum of LNG will get shifted to next year, creating a deficit market here against the market of loose market that was being shown here. So what it suggests is that going forward in next 3-4 years, we may not see easy LNG prices. That is what I want to convey out of these three projects. And if we superimpose the new other projects which are coming up and investments which have not kept pace with the times and the dates of commissioning, then I'm afraid and the demand, if it continues to rise in the manner it has been projected, then we may be seeing tightening of markets going forward. I will skip this, although I think Prasad Saab had covered that LNG projects in Canada break even is $7 to $8, and shipping costs are quite high to Asia. So some arbitrage, etc., and optimization of shipping costs will allow these projects to access closer markets. Cross-border pipelines, just one last slide which I talk about. They are complementary to LNG projects. They create long-term economic relations between nations in meeting energy needs, and as opposed to the trade and all that which we are talking about and liquidity, here it is point to point with limited flexibility. Capacities are defined, supply volumes are defined, destinations are defined. So to that extent, these pipelines create rigidity in the trading element, but they are supplementing the LNG in the manner that they are meeting the energy needs and supplementing, and they can, with higher compression, they can actually push more volumes to the markets which they are feeding, and therefore they are very important in meeting the energy needs of the nation. The chart suggests that over some distances, pipelines are beneficial as opposed to LNG. This is slightly older chart, but now optimization in LNG is also happening. Therefore, even at shorter distances, LNG may be challenging the pipeline transportation. So I think I will stop here. Thank you very much. I have overrun my time, but I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajiv Sab, for a very excellent and detailed presentation. We were, I think, short of time, and you had lots of things to share. But just to make sure to the participant that you can still pose your question, you can go through the slides. They shall be available on our website after this session is over. And if you have any questions later on, you can put it up to us, and we will ask those participants directly. So another question from Dr. Nawaz Ahmed. In the future role of LNG is expected to expand as a transition fuel, mainly driven by climate issues and imposed substantial carbon tax. Carbon tax is supposed to be paid by developed countries, but carbon tax is one of the causes of jacking up LNG prices. It means carbon tax is also paid by developing countries importing LNG. How to circumvent this challenge of price hikes driven by carbon tax for the developing countries?
I think Dr. Balyan is singularly the best person to answer this, sir.
Over to you, sir.
I'll attempt that. You see, as there are pressures on really overall energy sector to decarbonize all energy fuels. So, whether it is coal, coal in any case is considered as the dirty fuel, oil and gas also. And now, lastly, it has come on LNG itself. There also, we know now that the LNG which is decarbonized is priced differently, where they make it carbon neutral. This trend, although it has started in a small way, we feel that over a longer period of time will extend quite substantially. And it is not limited to fuel. In fact, European Union is thinking of having carbon tax on any product that comes into the European territory to be imposed with carbon tax. So I think we all the markets have to become very, very clear that in coming time, the carbon tax is likely to be made more practical, applicable, and perhaps used more in coming time. We have had some initiatives on carbon tax in the Asian region, particularly in the SAARC region. I would say we in India, some projects were identified and the carbon credits were created, but there were no trading done there. So it was not really fruitful implementation of the carbon tax structure within this. But as more and more trade happens between Asia and Europe and other countries, I think carbon tax would become, to my mind, slowly more acceptable, and more players will be sort of playing this. So I think it is an initial state, but I do believe with the emphasis on emissions control, on climate change, slowly not only fuel but other products also, commodities also would be covered under carbon tax, to my mind.
Yes,
Just to add to that, in the COP19, COP at December 9 at Copenhagen, the developed countries had committed a significant amount of funds for the developing countries, and probably it is up to the developing countries to leverage that commitment. It has been repeatedly being requested by the developing countries in the COPs to see that they get a good share of the commitments made in the Copenhagen COP way back in 2009, and probably that can be used to somehow fund the carbon tax that will be levied on all these imports. It's just a suggestion.
yes, very rightly said. And we have another question from Muhammad Shah Alam from Bangladesh. He's from Petro Bangla. What are the new countries coming to the LNG market as exporter in the near future?
Well, I think this has been aptly covered by Mr. Swami Prasad, as also Rajiv on that. In the list, they have seen that which are the major coming. But Rajiv, you can further substantiate
Sir,
this.
so countries which are coming up are essentially, Mozambique, Papua New Guinea, Cameroon, then not Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast is an importer. Then a lot of projects coming up in our Arctic, Russia. Then exporters, of course, in the US. A lot of new facilities are coming up. One or two facilities which are coming up in South America. So a lot of new heterogeneous suppliers. And then Australia, a lot of facilities have got deferred, which have the capability of exporting more volumes going forward. And then I said, Saudi has not announced anything, but they have the capability of setting up liquefaction facilities and huge volumes of gas which are available in Saudi Arabia. So
that's
all told,
very important.
yes, sir.
That is very important, that Saudi Arabia's gas reserve, they were never bothered about really taking a firm view about that. Now, if they start really collating and looking at LNG, they can create a real disruption in the LNG field and come up with huge capacities. Yeah, you're right.
SAARC member countries, especially closer to the Middle East and these countries, especially Qatar, Saudis, and maybe in future Iran, we don't know really. So because they have the huge amount of reserve, but because of the sanctions, they are unable to proceed. But I think for the time being, since 36 million ton of additional capacity is getting built in Qatar, and it is very close, we, I think, must look very closely their project, because they will be cost effective. They have the experience, and now they have to sell this volume. Not only 36 million, but Rajiv has mentioned about lot of volumes are getting now because the contracts are expiring. They would be available. So I think for SAARC member countries, I think this reason where the shipping cost is the less, and I think must look into detail of this these countries and examine.
Yes, very rightly said.
I think
Yes, please.
very rightly said, because in the slide in the Oxford study also we found that Qatar has the lowest costs of liquefaction to offer to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and this region, in fact.
Yes. So we have another question from Imran Akhtar, who's in Agra, Pakistan. The question is that LNG prices, particularly those linked to Brent, may be hedged to maintain a stable price as compared to the current extremely volatile prices. Hedging tools will have certain premium, however, it will be balanced out through the savings that may result from hedging. price stability will allow better planning for gas consuming sectors. Your comments on this, please. And before you reply, I think I would like to mention that this section will be covered in detail in tomorrow's morning
Yeah.
session. But
Yeah.
obviously, you can
So
just
I
briefly
think I
answer.
will not preempt Garg Sahab.
Yeah.
He has a full session on this, but you know, and as a principle, you know, if you are able to pass on the price, then you can sink or swim with the market. But if you are trying to, you know, protect a turf as opposed to what the market conditions are, then there is a cost to be paid. This is the limited what I want to make.
I think you are right, because these hedging tools, and especially they are available because link price is linked with Brent, and Brent is easily traded and it is available, and you can down risk your future any risk on this commodity. I think we'll discuss in detail when we go tomorrow in this pricing presentation, and we have detailed discussion on this. But yes, I agree. If your input prices are getting impacted with output prices, because output prices are linked with the market, and your input prices goes up all of a sudden because of the increase either in the Brent or increase because of the foreign exchange fluctuations, one must have to take care that how to down risk and make some premium at least for a shorter time to down risk that.
Very rightly said. And I think just for the knowledge of participants that all the presentations will be available. And secondly, we would like you to be more involved during the course of this training sessions. I would like more and more participants to ask questions and queries from the experts on these matters, especially Bangladesh and Sri Lankan delegates, because they are in the middle of procuring LNGs, and since Sri Lanka is also planning, and I can see many participants from the Sri Lankan side, so they would, I'm sure that they would be participating more in tomorrow's and the day after sessions. So now we would go on with the last question, which is from Mr. Asif Hanif. How long is the life of an LNG fleet slash vessel?
Can I answer? This
Yes,
no.
please.
Generally we
Yeah,
have
please.
a long-term charter. Long-term charter is linked with the long-term purchase of LNG when you are buying an FOB quantity, and it is seen that it is generally signed for 20 years or 25 years. But the ship life, what has been told, and it is experienced also, I think it goes beyond that period, and it goes even 40 years. But one thing I think most important to note, that the shipping technology is changing very fast. Efficiencies are coming, and if you have an older ship and it is you are using for your trade, and but you are having better technology and better fuel efficiency, better propulsion system, or an appropriate size, then probably you may not like to continue with the ship. You may like to change the shape for the future trade, and the older ship will get used, like Mr. Mathur has mentioned, either use an FSRU or an FSU, a floating storage unit, for a better use. So I think life is going to be 40 years. This is what experience indicate, and I think we have to go with the trade, how the trade would.
Just to add you what Mr. Garg has said, ship is a vessel. Vessel is designed for a certain lifespan. Also, at the same time, many marine rules are being upgraded, changed to facilitate business. Now, when a ship is there, now to address this, there are now double hull ships which are coming up. The dry docking requirement for a ship to be used as a ship or an FSRU are being reviewed, and there are new guidelines now available, so that a ship which is working as an FSRU can continue to work as an FSRU without being any disruption for taking it for dry docking. Dry docking is a mandatory thing to be done after certain 5 years, 6 years on that.
5 years.
So that would disturb the overall work if you have to take the FSRU there. So all these regulations are under change, and some new regulations are very much in line with to facilitate the business and not to disrupt it. So if you're able to dry dock it and get it certified for longer period, then the ship would be, or FSRU would be able to operate for longer time. And there are very strict, clear guidelines on dry docking on seeing certain specifications are met, are meeting the requirement of a worthiness of that ship. That's more important on that. And we are seeing that all these certifying agencies are working really very effectively to see that there are no dilution as such. At the same time, that these regulations are not becoming restrictive as well and facilitate business on that. We are seeing it very effectively in the FSRU case right now. And I think this is the reason why older ships are a very good candidate for conversion to some other activity of that ship, either an FSRU or maybe some other upgrading it to other activities there. These are now very much in vogue, and I think these are a very welcome development in the shipping industry.
Thank you very much, Balian sir. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, we are already out of our schedule, so we would like to conclude this today's session. For the information of the participants, the presentations would be uploaded on our website after the session is completed. And secondly, the same web link can be used to join tomorrow's session. Tomorrow we will again start at 10 o'clock, and for tomorrow we will start with the LNG pricing practices and risk management session. The second session will cover the LNG contracts across the supply chain. So thank you very much, Mr. Garg, Mr. Rajiv, Mr. Swami, and Mr. Balian for your interventions and for the presentations. It was a pleasure listening to you. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Bye-bye. See you tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.